I made this prediction before this whole crisis happened, but I said Boris Johnson might not, uh, shall we say, well, survive his this next 4 years in office. I said I don't think he's going to make it to the next election. And when he got COVID, I was like, oh no, Boris Johnson's going to be taken out by COVID. Um, but like I say, at least he didn't get taken out by that, because that is not how I want Boris Johnson to be taken out. Boris Johnson needs to be taken out by his own party. He needs to be hung and hoisted by his own petard. Now, this entire COVID crisis is all because of the Tories. We had, in 2009, our health secretary at the time, the Labour health secretary, Jack Straw, stood up and said, I am glad to report that the World Health Organization has classed us and France as the most prepared countries for a potential pandemic. How did we get from that statement being read out in the Houses of Parliament to where we are now, that we've had such an unmitigated disaster, our own government planning a herd immunity strategy, which we know would have ended terribly with even more deaths? We are still on track to be one of the highest death rates of COVID in this country, and we're still trying to track the ones where, like the care homes, we know people have died of COVID in care homes. They haven't been added to the official number, so it's going to be a lot even more higher when all this is said and done. That the death toll is going to be a lot higher than it currently is, unfortunately. The one Matt Hancock yesterday talked about getting out of this, but you don't get out of this situation without being able to track and test people of where the hotspots are. If you stop letting people go back to work, they could be living in a hotspot, and all you know, you have a massive COVID outbreak on your hands in that town or that city, and it just starts all over again. Those testing and the tracking has still not been implemented by our government, despite the promises that they have made. This has been one continuous, utter cascade, one after another. And after the election, we read a piece about, okay, it's bad that the Tories have got a big legislative agenda, but that's also going to work against them. Because back in the day when Boris was mayor, he used to put a lot of his failings at that time on Labour councillors that were in the London area. He used to blame them. The thing is now they've got Tories have, like I say, they've got a massive majority. They could be doing so much stuff to try and help people. They haven't introduced a rent freeze. They haven't introduced mortgage freezes either. This is a situation where people have had to rely on their banks to come and do this of their own volition. Other countries in Europe and around the world that are suffering did this almost immediately when this happened, when they realised that this might be the case. If you haven't got a good landlord, chances are you're now still going to have to pay rent, and we are looking at a case where a lot of people could be made homeless in the next 2 to 3 months because the government still hasn't acted on this. And we are looking, again, at a potential crisis. The government, bizarrely, is making, we'll get into this, bizarre demands about trying to, in the Brexit deal, and the EU has basically come out and said, yeah, you're being difficult on purpose here. You're not putting anything constructive forward. They're trying to make the EU withdraw on purpose so then they can blame the EU. This, again, I said it back again before all this. I think getting a no deal was always their intended outcome. That's what they wanted, but they just didn't want to say that was what they wanted, because they know a lot of people wouldn't agree to it. Even now, if we had another referendum that was we go full bore no deal or Remain would win. That's no question. That has been done multiple times in multiple tests, censuses, questionnaires, and it's always come out Remain would win in that referendum. Now, back to what we started with. Boris Johnson's not going to survive this. At the next election, they are going to get absolutely hammered for this, and this is going to be going rolling forward, because there will be an inquest. And if they try to whitewash this inquest, which they may try to do, rather than have it being an open and public one, they might try to have a parliamentary one where they just stack the committee with all Conservative members who are basically just told to, just downplay our involvement in all this. That's what they may actually try and do. I wouldn't put it past them, but even then, that isn't going to look good on them. Because when you have these inquests, very often things do come out and they cannot suppress and try and whitewash everything that they try and do. So we've also got that interesting situation of where even the right-wing press has started to take Boris to task over what he was doing. You look at the start of all this, calling Boris Johnson a hero. They've now started to actually question Boris's decisions. They haven't got to the point of it's Boris's fault, but it's not going to be a massive leap in logic for them to get to that point. And here we come to today's article from True Publica. Johnson's days are now numbered. Murdoch approval given. So, by the True Publica editor, the short answer to the even more shrill question about Boris Johnson's premiership is that he will not last for very much longer, given the current trajectory of abject failure. Many people have absorbed the Sunday Times story in one form or another, and many, many more have read snippets passed around that has littered social media for the past 48 hours. The sense of outrage is palpable. The government has disputed the findings, but who really believes a government that got into power in the first place by lying, peddling misinformation, and manufacturing fake news when you're in the middle of a crisis that threatens just about every family in the country? The lineup of the catastrophic decision-making supported by the likes of Murdoch and Trump speaks volumes. Dismissive of the non-stop warnings and the failure to act has led directly to a lot of dead people in Britain, and the public will not forget that fact easily. They won't forget that when the Prime Minister was supposed to be looking at the evidence, speaking to experts, and preparing for the obvious national crisis heading our way, he was lost in his own world of creating personal relationships, divorce, feeble second holidays, and other such nonsense. When he did wake up, he decided it was easier to manage it by letting it wash over us, and by tapered herd immunity. It was also lost on Boris Johnson and his hopeless, incompetent team that herd immunity is a vaccine-based model, not a model designed to protect a nation from a killer viral pandemic. Documents revealed by True Publica showed that the government knew a pandemic was inevitable. It tested the NHS for such an event and suppressed the results as it didn't fit with their aggressive privatisation plans. More intensive care beds and ventilators would have cost money, so the response was to sell off vital supplies of PPE and make some money. When it dawned on the government that the crisis had not just arrived, but it was too late to do anything and thousands would die, astonishingly, they decided to formally downgrade the coronavirus, the COVID-19. All other epidemics such as SARS, MRS, and that even killed very few Britons, remained a high priority of infectious diseases. Somehow, there was a complacent belief that it was not for the UK government to intervene in something like a pandemic, most especially because the one thing that they did realise was that a lockdown would destroy the economy. And that was a price too high for them. And it still is. This neoliberal economic policy in the hands of extremists, not rational normal people. And Johnson's fight is not about the COVID-19 anymore. He's fighting medics on the front line who squarely blame his government for needlessly treating them like cannon fodder and frightening families of loved ones, in addition to some of the once friendly mainstream media who have now all about turned on him and become hostile. At the end of the last election, the mainstream media were in a critical spotlight for their coordinated push against the political opposition, which had resulted that they had lost a huge amount of public faith in them. And they know it. The crisis is their chance to get the public back on side, and that is exactly what we are seeing, albeit they could be asking even more questions than they already are. Richard Murphy from Tax Research UK rightly points out the government has tried to rebuke the claims in the Sunday Times article. I suspect they protest too much, and the harm caused by doing so. It does not matter whether the PM attends Cobra as a matter of routine or not. His judgment on this issue was so wrong. Why did he miss 5? And that the error in judgment is his crime. It's not just the journalists who have lost faith in him, though. I suspect the public has over the PPE, and they will support doctors who might refuse to work without protection on this issue. The Scottish government is now rightly distancing itself from Westminster, as the seat of power in Britain now stinks of rotting dead wood. So has Boris Johnson been found guilty of negligence in public office, and he is too toxic for a Tory party that is quickly bailing the water out of a sinking ship. I doubt it yet, but he's getting really close. The UK is rapidly closing on the 20,000 official listed COVID-19 deaths, but that doesn't include other numbers such as care homes and home deaths that will come to the foreground soon. It is also much clearer that telling that Rupert Murdoch has now abandoned the Johnson ship, confirmed in this Sunday Times story. The charge of incompetence and negligence is now well and truly laid bare, and the public has just about made up its mind there. There is a moment when all the evidence of failure will be overwhelming, and I suspect that moment will arrive quite soon. And the evidence is there to suggest that the UK death toll from COVID-19 may well increase for the many months to come. Too long for non-stop failure to continue. We could see easily 25,000 deaths in the headlines, but 30,000 will surely be the tipping point. And that is now in sight. Then the economic crisis of the lockdown will unfold, and the wider public health crisis will follow it. The headlines will follow the raised unemployment, bank repossessions, more homelessness, and food banks lining up in every high street in the country. There will be no V-shaped recession. Throughout this all, Boris Johnson, the one-trick Brexit pony who never had an original idea, will offer an austerity-weary, virus-ridden citizenry nothing more than a bigger recession. Getting Brexit done is no longer a high priority. Helping people recover and getting over a crisis that was deepened by populism and empty three-word slogans will be. I think the Sunday Times knows this. They see the writing on the wall, so does Murdoch, and he can smell a political dead body in the water from miles. Richard Murphy again. They sense Johnson will go the way of Chamberlain and others who were overwhelmed by events during the crisis, whose early events they oversaw. To put it another way, they do not think Johnson is a Churchill. They think he's an Asquith, and his days are decidedly numbered, and they've got their attack in early. Politico feels the same way, as its headlines focus on the PM's failure to be anything like his hero Churchill. Boris Johnson faces up his moment in history. Various other news outlets are now following the same path, and serious questioning of Britain's leadership in a time of crisis. There is a strong possibility that Johnson will throw his colleagues under the COVID bus in a bid to save his own skin, but that strategy may not work from within, of course. We've all seen the vacuous opportunists fall in real time, and it is more likely that they will no doubt keep him in position until they have their own ducks in a row once again and throw Johnson to the wolves. The question is, who will take his place and when? But maybe the bigger question is, what will they do that will make a difference, that makes a real difference to the public? So I think that's very likely. I think we could definitely see calling for Johnson's head, but I don't think it will. Well, you don't know, really. But yeah, looks like my bet that Johnson won't survive his term may or may not come true, and it may look like that, as we've said before, the Tory party, if they smell blood in the water on their leader, they will pull out the knives. They are not afraid of doing this. We've seen this with Theresa May, historically as well. It fits with their pattern, so we'll just have to see what happens.